I wonder if there's anybody out there that's had a similar experience to me. You're driving somewhere, it's really important you be there, and traffic is slow. Anybody had one of those moments? Who do you become in that moment? It's in that moment that I hope, and I don't believe that this is true or possible, but it's in that moment that there's an ounce of me that hopes that God is somewhere else doing something else and more focused on someone else. That I have that moment in the car where I'm either driving downtown at 8:30 or 9 in the morning and have to be in an appointment at 9:05, or it's when I've been downtown and I'm trying to get home and I leave at like 4:30 and I get stuck, and then I'm driving in the car and thankfully no one else is with me, and there's this part of me that wishes that God was doing something else with someone else somewhere else so that he wouldn't see the person I'm becoming in that moment in my car, because I don't turn green and turn into the Incredible Hulk, but there is something in me in that moment that becomes unchristian-like. Like there's that part of me that just like I grab the steering wheel a little bit tighter, there's a vein in my forehead that pops out. I start to have very animated conversations with the person that's 4 cars ahead of me that won't move that 3 inches because the car in front of him rolled just a little bit. It's like, come on, like there's just anybody else? Nobody? Okay. Well, if that's not you, there is this thing that happens to me in that moment, and if this has never happened to you, I'm sorry, but what happens to me in that moment is I'm stuck, and I'm listening to that song that I love on the radio, when all of a sudden, this car in that beautiful left lane flies by me. And even though I know that car is going upwards of 100 kilometers an hour or faster, it's like in that moment, it's going in super slow motion. And it's like I see everybody and they're listening to like Twisted Sister, like, we're not gonna take, they're having that moment in the car and they're rocking out and everybody's hair is moving super slow. And then there's that guy in the back seat who I really don't like, who kind of gives me the wink and the gun as he passes by me and the sparkle in his teeth happens. And there's just something in me that develops. I don't want to call it my spiritual gift of road rage, but there's just something in me that gets really agitated and really upset. I'm just like, oh, and I squeeze that steering wheel just a little bit tight. Anybody, come on, anybody had a similar experience every morning? Yeah, 8:30 every Monday to Friday. No, it happens to us. And there's that car that goes by and they are going in the same direction that I'm going in. But they're going to get where they're going faster than I will because they've chosen to go together. And so as we launch into 2019 and over these next 4 weeks, as we kind of head off into this new season of life, as it relates to our life and our ministry here at the church, I want to talk to you about this idea of us carpooling together. And I'm using the term carpooling because the truth is that churches, at least most churches, hopefully all churches, are all going in the same direction. That every single church has the same destination mapped out, that every church has the same goal in mind, that there's a mandate that we've been given, there's a destination that has been set out for us that's the same for all churches, so hopefully we're all going there, and the mandate, the direction that we're supposed to be going in will not ever change. And it started out with Jesus all these years ago when he had 12 young men that he was carpooling with. He spent 3 years in a vehicle with them, taking them to a specific place. And he knew in his mind and in his heart where he was taking these 12 young men. He knew that he was investing in them, building in them so that he could one day leave the keys to the church in their hands. But the wild part is that Jesus knew what was going to happen, and Jesus knew very clearly where he was taking them, but they didn't get it. These 12 young men, even though they walk with Jesus and talk with Jesus, and even though Jesus time after time kind of tried to explain to them the direction that they were going, they didn't get it. But in his last moments on earth, Jesus gave them a very clear destination, and he gave them directions on how to get there, directions that we still, all these years later, all these generations later, still follow today. It's found in the book of Matthew. Chapter 28, Jesus came and told his disciples, these 12 young men, he said, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. So Jesus is saying to these guys, listen, I have the right, I have the power, I have the authority to command you, to guide you, to give you this destination. I am the one who has the right, who has the authority to plot out the destination for you and for your future. He says, that's been given to me. And so because I have this ability, because I have this authority, he says, therefore go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples. So it doesn't just start and stop with you guys. I want it to continue on. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands that I have given you. And be sure of this. Be sure of this, he says, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So here's this mandate. Here's this destination that Jesus instituted amongst these 12 young men. And again, it was very clear. It was very concise. It wasn't up for debate, and it isn't up to debate today. Jesus told these young men these directions, and they echo from generation to generation to generation to us today. And it's simply this: go and make disciples. It isn't wait for them to come to you and then make them disciples. The mandate that Jesus gave those 12 young men, the mandate that he gives to us that echoes all these years later, is for us to go and to make disciples, for us to go and make followers of Jesus. Now that sounds great. Sounds nice. It's super clear. But where the windshield, and when the windshield gets dirty, is when we start talking about how. When we start talking about how and what does that look like? And what does it sound like? And when does it happen? Where does it happen? How does it happen? When we start asking those questions, the mandate, the destination that was so clear becomes foggy really quickly. And I believe that Jesus, knowing what Jesus knew about people then and what I believe he knows about people today, is he knew we were going to struggle with this. That he knew, as clear as he was being in that moment when he said, go and make disciples, I believe that Jesus knew in his mind and in his heart that all these years later we were going to struggle. That we were going to have conversations and that we were going to have debates and discussions, that there would be division and dissension amongst us as Christians, as followers of Jesus, as churches, because we won't all agree on what and how and when and what that sounds like and all these other questions. And because Jesus knew that, Jesus prayed. And Jesus, towards the end of his life, had this moment where he prayed. And you got to imagine, when you know your life is coming to an end, and when you know your time on this earth is done, the things that you think about, the things that you say, the things that you pray about really reflect what's most important to you, right? So here's Jesus, if you can imagine that he knows his time on earth is winding down, his ministry, more importantly, his life on earth is coming to an end. And in that moment, he prays, and here's what he says. He says, I'm praying not only for these disciples, so not only these 12 guys that I've invested in and built in for the last 3 years, he says, I'm praying not only for these disciples, but also for all who will ever believe in me through their message. Do you know who all is? All, right? All is you, and all is me. That all those years ago, when Jesus' life on earth was coming to an end, and when Jesus prayed, he didn't just pray for the 12 young men that he knew and had invested in and spent his time with. That Jesus had this ability to see from generation to generation, and he sees you and sees me. And he says, God, I pray for these people. I pray for all of them, and I pray that they will all be one. That they would all be one, just as you and I are one. And as you are in me, Father, and I am in you. And may they be in us, so that the world will believe that you sent me. So again, Jesus, if you can imagine, is praying. And in this moment, he's praying what's most important, that you can see through his heart and you can see through his words as he talks to his heavenly Father of what is truly most important to him. And he says, Father, there will be people years from now who will come to know you because of these people, if they can be one. And again, that sounds great. But how do you be one with people when you don't agree? How do you be one with people when you don't agree? Because the truth is, if you were to ask 100 people what church should be and what church should look like and what church should sound like and what should happen on a Sunday morning and what should happen day to day as the church operates and how the church should spend its money, if you were to ask 100 different people, my guess is you would get 100 different answers. Because everybody has their own perspective, everybody has their own opinion, everybody has their own values, everybody has their own history, their own experience, their own background, and as a result, everybody has an opinion as to what the church should be, what the church should do, what the church should sound like, and how it should act, and what should happen in and with it. And the truth is that we can all be traveling in the same direction. Not just as a church, but as the church, we can all be traveling in the same direction and not be traveling in the same car. The truth is that churches across this city, across the world in reality, can all be traveling in the same direction with the destination of trying to make disciples, but at the same time be traveling in different cars because they've chosen to travel at a different speed. That there are churches that are gathering right now across the city who have chosen to drive at a different speed than we have. Some of them are moving faster. Some of them are moving slower. Some of them are not moving at all. Some of them can't be seen because they're so far ahead. There are churches across this city today who have chosen to operate and take on a different model. They've driven a different model. They travel in a different make. They've adapted and adopted a different philosophy than mine or than ours. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. That's just a thing. That there are churches, and I can celebrate with what God is doing in, with, and through those churches because we are one in our ultimate destination of fulfilling the command that Jesus gave and instituted all those years ago, that we are to go and to make disciples. And I don't have to agree with how they've chosen to do it. I just have to celebrate the fact that they are fulfilling the command that Jesus gave. The problem those churches have, the problem any church has, is under its roof trying to gather everyone under that roof together. The trouble those churches have, the trouble any church has, is trying to get everybody within the confines of the local church to carpool together towards one vision, with one goal, with one common interest and one common ground. That's incredibly difficult to do. Because the truth is, if across this room this morning, every single one of us has a different background. Every single one of us has a different experience. Every single one of us has a different viewpoint on what church should be and what church is and what church isn't. All of us have different likes and different dislikes. If I were to poll the audience this morning, I would guess that I wouldn't get two answers the same as to what the church should do and how it should function and what it should look like. That every single one of us, when we get in the car, we turn the radio station to the station we know, the station that plays the songs we know and the songs that we love. That if I were to ask you what generation has the greatest music ever, my guess is that you would respond the era that you grew up in, right? For me, it's the 90s. You ask me what the best era of music is, I'm going to tell you it's the 90s because I grew up in the 90s and I have a strong emotional attachment to the music of that era. That every time I hear a song from the 90s, it takes me back to a place where I had an experience, where I had a moment, and I'm whisked away to better days where the hair flowed and life was good, where life was easy and responsibilities weren't as difficult as they are today. And the same is true for you. And when it relates to church, you're taken back to that era where you fell in love with the Lord, where you had an experience, where you had an encounter, or maybe you grew up in the church. And so what you grew up in is what you know and has become what you value. And it's difficult for you to see or value anything beyond your experience. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. That's a thing. That's a thing that we all do in a lot of different areas of our lives. But the problem is, when we give in to that natural behavior to become in love with what we know and what we value, we become isolated. We can become a group of people within the context of a local church, and while we're all together in the same building, we're all traveling to the same destination, but we're traveling in different cars because we become isolated to what we know and to what we value. And again, we can all still be in love with God. We can all still believe in God. We can all still have a desire to make disciples, but we're all going to have a different opinion as to how we make that happen. And so rather than being a collective or a body that's moving towards one goal, towards one vision, towards one destination, we become a bunch of people driving in separate cars. And I believe there's a better way. I believe that if we carpool together, we can go farther faster. That we can see more together. We can accomplish more together. We can celebrate and rejoice greater and bigger things if we go together, because the truth is, and you know this, when you travel alone, it's tiring. It might be good for a half an hour to get away from the chaos and the noise and to listen to the songs you know and just have some time alone with your own mind and your own thoughts. But you start traveling for hours after hours after hours on your own, it's exhausting. And even though you'll get where you're going, you'll be exhausted when you get there. And you'll have celebrated things on your own. I mean, think about it. When you're in the car and you're all alone and something funny hits you, it's awkward to kind of laugh at your own story, right? You're just like, man, I'm a funny guy. And then you kind of look around and you're like, that's really awkward. And people, or have you ever sang in the car? Or have you ever watched somebody singing in the car when they're driving on their own? That is hilarious, right? You pull up to the stop sign and that girl's just banging it out. You're just like, clearly she's lost herself, right? There's no fun in traveling alone. But when you carpool together and when you turn up that song that you know and when everybody chimes in when it hits the Sweet Caroline, life is good. So for today, what my goal is I want to show you the value in us driving and carpooling together. Because the truth is, in order to carpool, you have to let go of some things, right? In order to carpool with a group of people, you have to make space in the vehicle for other people. You have to sacrifice some things in order to allow other people to travel with you. For some of us, it's, letting go of some things. For some of us, it's saying no to things we wouldn't normally say no to, whether it's the radio station or something else. For others of us, it means saying yes to things we wouldn't normally say yes to, letting somebody eat in your car. I don't know what it might be. But for all of us, it will require us, in order for us to carpool together, to make space for one another in order for us to travel together. But here's what I believe. The value in us going together far exceeds the cost each of us will have to make in order to make that happen. So for today, what I want to do is I want to give you a brief glimpse into what tomorrow looks like, with the hope that we'll head towards tomorrow together. And then over the next 3 weeks, I want to kind of pop the hood and show you what I believe it will take in order for us to get there. So many of you, and I know this, I know for many of you, you're going to have a moment today when I'm sharing a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about for these next few moments. Many of you, if not most of you, are going to walk out of here going, I already heard all that before. There are some of you that are going to be like, I could have just left halfway through the service. The ATM didn't work anyway, and I could have just left, and it wouldn't have mattered because I've heard all of this stuff before. I didn't hear anything new, and that you'd be right. Because the truth is, I got in this vehicle 6 years ago because I believe in the direction and the mission and the vision of the bridge. That I was thrilled to come on staff at this church 6 years ago because I believe in where, and I still believe in where we're going. And so the reality is we're not changing course. The truth is that we're, when Alan is moving on in June, and I'm assuming, his role and all these other kind of things, it's not like the church has been going over here and all of a sudden we're going to veer off in some completely different direction. The bridge will continue to be what the bridge has been about for as long as I've been around. The difference is we're just swapping out drivers. And it's been a thrill for me to serve under Alan Summers over the last 6 years. I have learned more than I can tell you. And I've been thrilled to call him my pastor and my leader. And there's been this shift that's happened in both of our lives in these last few months, these last few years. And to be quite honest with you, I didn't see it coming. But I can tell you this morning that I believe with all of my heart that God is leading me and has led me to this place and is leading me to get behind the wheel of this vehicle that I've been in with you for 6 years. We're just changing drivers. And I know that as we kind of sit on the side of the road this morning, and as Alan and I get out, and as we all stretch our legs before we get back in the vehicle and head back on our way towards our destination, it's probably important for me to share with you a little bit about myself, because it's weird to get in a car with somebody that you don't even know if they can drive, right? I mean, let's be honest, there's many of you who have kind of gone, hey, I've been a part of the bridge for the last number of years, and I know and I respect and I appreciate Alan Summers. He's been doing this for a long time, and the whole Maple Leaf thing's a little weird, but everybody's got their issue. So I can rally behind him, but all of a sudden, here's this guy who wears ripped jeans on occasion, and his hair is always a mess, and he's kind of jumping in, and I'm like, I don't really know where we're going. And I don't know what that's going to look like now. And I don't know what that's going to sound like now. And can this guy even drive? Does he even have his license? And I get that. So before I jump in any further into where we're going, I do want to just take a few moments and share with you a little bit about who I am and how I ended up before you today. Because quite honestly, it is a miracle. It is a miracle that I'm standing here today. That me standing in front of you and being able to share any of this is a testimony to the greatness and the faithfulness of God. Because the truth is, when I first started out in church many, many years ago, I bombed. The truth is, when I was put in a position where I had a tremendous amount of responsibility in church years and years and years ago, I failed horribly. That there was a weight, there was a responsibility, there was an expectation that was put on me, was put on my shoulders, and I did not deliver. And as a result, there were hundreds of people in an auditorium just like this who were looking at me and saying, what a mess. I was 4 years old. I was 4 years old. I was asked to be the ring bearer at a wedding. It ended up being a funeral. It was almost my funeral, because here was this young kid in a baby blue suit who was said, hey, we want you to be the ring bearer. You have all this responsibility put on you. Don't screw it up. And I screwed it up. I fell asleep. I was at the front of this beautiful church with so much responsibility hanging in the balance, that everybody in the auditorium's expectations were on me to perform at a certain way and on a certain level, and I failed horribly. And I would love to tell you that my failures as a person stopped in that moment, but the truth is, they didn't. The truth is I've gone through my early years, as I've gone through my teen years, as I went through my young adult years, my 30s, the truth is, I've fallen more times than I can count. And it's only because of the faithfulness of my Heavenly Father that I even have the opportunity to stand before you today. It's His greatness and it's His faithfulness that covers all of my sin and all of your sin. I didn't stop there, and if anybody were to tell you in my family that they thought I was going to end up in ministry, I would call them a liar, because the truth is I had no idea where I was going in life. As I went through high school, I had different things that there was moments in my life I wanted to be a lawyer. There was moments where I wanted to be an artist. There was moments I wanted to be a rock star. There was moments I wanted to be an artist for the government and draw unemployment. There were moments where I wanted to do all kinds of things, but I really had no direction. And so when I got out of high school, when I graduated, there was a young man who was attending a Bible college who was working at a church who I met at a basketball court. His name was Dennis Brown, and Dennis Brown invested and poured his life into mine. And so when I was struggling with what I'm going to do and what I'm going to be and where is my life going, Dennis said, hey, listen, man, don't pressure yourself to figure it out. Why don't you just go to Bethany Bible College? It's in Sussex. It's in your hometown. You can just stay in town and take your first year courses. And when you figure out what you want to do, then you can transfer. But you've got your first year courses. Now, I wasn't a Christian. I wasn't somebody who would ever in a million years imagine being in a role that I'm in today. I had no idea what I was going to do and who I was going to be. I didn't know who I was then. And so I went to this school with really the idea that I was only going for a year and was going to get some courses, but then I ran into 4 other guys. And these 4 other guys, I've mentioned them a few times, but these 4 guys shaped my life and eventually shaped my ministry in more ways than I can explain. See, 2 of them were pastors' kids. They had grown up in the church. They knew the church in and out. They knew the songs. They knew the stories. They knew everything that I didn't know. But they were there for the same reason I was. They were there to get some first-year courses and then transfer, because like me, they had no idea where they were going or who they were going to be. They didn't know who they were now. What they did know was that they believed there was a God, but they knew they didn't believe in church anymore. And they were pastors' kids. Pastors' kids who'd grown up in the church their whole life, but at this point in their life, as they were in their first year of college, had said, hey, we're not questioning whether there's a God or not. We just question, is the church worth it? And so I began listening to them and hearing from their experiences and kind of seeing their questions and seeing what the church had done, and the way the church was had really reflected to them that the church wasn't relevant, that it wasn't God that was the issue, it was the church that was the issue. And then there were 2 other guys that I ran around with. The 5 of us went together, and these other 2 guys, they were just like, hey, we're here because it's cheap. And they were getting some courses, and we're going to transfer too. And so I ran around with these 4 guys for a year. And they molded me and shaped me in the way that I saw not only God, but the way I saw the church. And as I began to study and as I began to discover more about God and sense this calling on my life to be a pastor, I continued to see the church not through the school's eyes, but I continued to see the church through their eyes. I have a brother who is 4 years younger than I am, who doesn't attend church. He might go maybe once a year if my mom can get him there. And every time that I wrote a sermon while I was in college, or every time I did a paper on what the church should look like and how the church should function and who the church should focus in on, I thought about my 4 friends and I thought about my brother. And every time that I've preached a sermon at the bridge, I have written that sermon with those 5 people in mind. And I imagine them in the back row and I wonder, do they get this? Does this connect with them? Does this resonate with them? Does it resonate with your brother? Does it resonate with your friends that don't go to church? They might believe there's a God, but they're not sure the church has anything to offer them. That's who I think about. I don't think about people who have walked with God for 20, 30 years. I'm glad that they're here, and I hope they discover something new. But I have this sense and this weight to connect and reach people who are far from God. And that is why I am so thankful to be a part of this church. Because we have been focusing and will continue to focus our attention, our resources, everything that we have on those that are unchurched and those that are dechurched. People that are unchurched, people that would not darken the doors of a church, we want to focus everything that we have through their eyes. We want to see the church through their eyes. The de-church, the people that might have grown up in the church, have been part of the church their whole life, but maybe at college or maybe as they got out of college, they just kind of lost track or just kind of walked away. And it's not that they don't believe that there's a God, they just don't really care about church anymore. It's lost its luster, and it doesn't really connect, and it doesn't really resonate, and there's nothing that it has to offer them. And again, it has nothing to do with God. It has everything to do with the church. And I'm so thankful that we are so laser focused on our efforts to reach and connect with those people. And we will continue to do that. So everything that we do, everything that we evaluate is through the lens of those people. That might be you. It might have been you. It might be someone that you care about. It might be your spouse. It might be your kid. It might be your coworker. It might be your parent. That's who we're thinking about. And we will leverage every gift in this room to reach those people. We'll carpool together with the efforts of getting them in the car with us as we continue to go about our Heavenly Father's business of making disciples. That's why every Sunday when you see Alan or myself start off the service and we introduce ourselves, hi, my name is Alan, or hi, my name is Scott, you wonder, why in the world do we do that? We know who you are. You do. But there might be someone who is here today, and this is their first time here, and so we want to make sure that they understand that we were expecting them. And though everyone else in the room might know who we are, they might not. And we want to clearly communicate to them that we've been expecting them. Have you ever been in that moment where maybe you're leaving a meeting or you're leaving a game or someone says, hey, can I get a lift? And you're like, yeah, sure. And then as they're getting into the passenger seat of the car, you're like, oh, sorry for the mess. And you start throwing things in the back seat and you're apologizing for the half-eaten Happy Meal that's on the seat and you're apologizing for this and you're apologizing for that. Why? You weren't expecting to give them a ride. And it becomes very obvious in that moment that you weren't expecting to give anybody a ride. So when we stand up and we say, hi, my name is Scott, we're trying to communicate, we've been expecting you. And everything we do is through that lens, whether it be the songs we sing, the style of preaching that we do, whether it be the sets, whether it be the environment. So we create, everything is done through the lens of someone who is far from God. And our goal is, while we can't save someone, we can set up a lot of dates with a perfect Heavenly Father, and that's what we choose to do. So as we continue to do that, I believe that there needs to be a thread, if you can imagine this with me, a thread that goes through every single ministry, a thread, a progression of discipleship. When we reach that person for that very first time, wherever they are, that there is a thread, that if you can imagine a person comes to the bridge for the first time and then all of a sudden he and their spouse, they have a child together, and that child comes to the bridge with them, that there should be a thread of discipleship from the moment that child attends the bridge for the first time through their whole life, if there was such a thing as a person staying at one church for their whole life. That ministries aren't silo heavy, they're not isolated, and they're not just their own thing, doing their own thing with their own values and their own perspectives. That every ministry that is a part of the bridge has a thread through it, a progression of discipleship. That our children's ministry is not seen as babysitting, it's seen as a ministry. Do you believe that? Do you believe that our children's ministry is more than babysitting? I do. I do. I believe that what happens in Bridge Kids is more valuable than we can ever imagine. Because I believe that there are children down the hall from us that will sit in classrooms you and I will never sit in. And if we did, that'd be really creepy. Right? There are kids that are going to represent and reflect the love of Jesus Christ in classrooms and in homes that you and I will never be in. If a child at 4 or 5 years old at kids camp or at Bridge Kids on Sunday morning makes a decision that in their understanding of who God is, I want to follow God, I want to follow Jesus with my life, I believe that child has the same Holy Spirit in them that I as an adult have in me. So that means that child isn't just being babysat. That means that child is being invested in and has something to offer the body of Christ and has a place in this place. And then they move forward out of Bridge Kids and they move into our student ministry. In student ministry, there's a big difference between a student ministry and a youth group. Many of us went to youth groups as students, right? It was just a cool place to hang out and we did some fun things, but a student ministry is incredibly different. A student ministry creates environments and creates opportunities where students connect with one another and develop bonds and relationships that will keep them away from so many things that will detract them from who they could become. And you know this, those of you that are out of your teen years, some of your greatest regrets came in your teen years, didn't they? Because you weren't in a peer group that supported you and encouraged you. You were in a peer group that didn't care what you did. In fact, they tried to get you to do the things that were hurtful, right? We want to be the opposite. We want to create environments for our students where they connect and they don't just leave high school kind of wishy-washy and not sure. We want to teach them not what to think, we want to teach them how to think so that when they enter college, university, when they go off and when they leave the home, they're not floundering, they're flourishing. That they're sent off with purpose and value and they're launched into this next phase of their life armed and ready for greatness. And because they've been invested in as kids and as students, they in turn feel this responsibility and this empowerment to in turn serve those age groups that they were served so well in. And as young adults, they become vibrant and alive and have this sense of purpose. And they see while so many of their peers are off and doing so many crazy things and off focusing on themselves and what they're going to get out of life, we have students, young adults, who are armed with purpose and that they see that the greatness in life is how it's poured out, not in what's gotten. And then maybe that person gets married. And while everybody else on their street, every other marriage is falling apart or bubbling over with discontentment, this one family, because of the investment and the ministry of this church, this one family has a marriage that's envied by every other couple on the block. And that while so many other marriages are chasing after that rat race, this family has their home in perspective. That this family, because of the ministry of this church, recognizes that what they pray for together is so much more valuable than what they pay for together. And their marriages are burning with love and with passion. And these kids that are growing up in their homes see what a mom and dad, how they should love one another and how they should treat and respect one another. And they'll discover that and they'll see that because of what we teach and what we reflect and what we value here as a church. That there will be parents out there that will discover that when their child is born, they only have 936 months between the time that child is born and when they graduate high school. And rather than that being a fearful, sobering reality, it's an empowering moment where they discover as parents that they need to say no to a lot of good things in order to say yes to the best thing. And they'll discover more and more what that best thing is because of the ministry of this church. And then they'll move into a different phase of life where the career is over, retirement is looming, and they enter into this phase of being a senior. And they discover that being a senior is so much more valuable than a discount at Shoppers Drug Mart. That they discover as a senior that in that age and stage where there's a lot of question as to who am I and what is my value anymore and everything that I used to do is gone and I'm not really sure what to do with my life. Rather than that, they see that there is joy and fulfillment and empowerment in this next phase of life because they have an opportunity that no one else on the planet has. That because of their heritage and because of their experience, they can be leveraged in their gifts and their talents, and they can breathe life and legacy into married couples, into singles, into young adults, into students, into kids in a way that no one else can. 2 years ago, one of our seniors volunteered at our Bridge Kids camp. And he served and ministered faithfully. His name is Luke Legault. Many of you know Luke. Some of you don't. That's okay. But Luke Legault served in a capacity called Imagination Station at our kids' camp. And there was a young boy named Braden who just was like, this guy is the most amazing person I've ever met. And he just was like infatuated with him and just watched him. And Luke didn't just see his time as filling a space in a schedule during camp. But he saw it as an opportunity to invest in a young person. And so he talked with him and he encouraged him and he knew his name and he talked with him every single day for a week. And then a year later, that investment wasn't forgotten. In fact, that young boy, Braden, he was old enough now to become a volunteer. And he wanted to be a volunteer. And who do you think he asked to volunteer with? It wasn't the cool hipster teen. It wasn't the popular person. It wasn't the younger person. He wanted to volunteer with Mr. Luke because Mr. Luke had made an investment in his life that was not forgotten. But throughout the ministry of the bridge, there needs to be a thread, a progression of discipleship where every single ministry sees that it's not its own thing, that everything is interconnected, and what happens in one ministry directly impacts what happens in another ministry. And we see this thread, this progression of discipleship. And as a church, we will make investments in our community and a community around the world. That we are going to continue to make investments in our local community, but not just the community of Canada. That we are still about the mission of making churches in multiple locations, the vision of making churches in multiple locations. That many of you have asked the question, why is it bridgechurches.ca? It's because we have been in planning and praying in preparation of the one day launching, not just one, but multiple locations across the Ottawa Valley. That we will be one church in multiple locations. That rather than expecting people to come to us so we can make disciples, no, we are going to go, we're going to carpool together and we are going to go and make disciples. And we'll plant locations in multiple locations. Right now, there are people that drive over an hour to come to church on a Sunday morning. Can you believe that? Why? Because they value what happens in this place. What if we were to take that value to where they are, to their neighborhood, to their community? We're going to do that. And we're going to impact a community around the world. The missions is a buzzword that happens in church world, and there's so many different realities and questions as to what missions is and what value is missions and where should you do it and how should you do it. Rather than just once or twice a year making an impact in a given area, the desire is to see a one location invested in for a long period of time. That whether it's a 5-year or a 10-year relationship that's built with one community somewhere across the world, so that we send people to the same location and build relationships year after year after year. That it's not just drop in for a week, but it's drop in for years. And we'll make that investment and we'll bring people here and we'll send people there and we'll have this dynamic relationship. So rather than just kind of dropping in 5 or 6 people, we're going to send 500 people every week with love and support and prayer. There are so many things that we can do if we carpool together. The truth is we can get there on our own. You can ride alone or take 2 people with you and like what you like together, or we can each let go of some things and we can each grab something else and we can carpool together, because I believe with all of my heart that we can see and experience and accomplish so much more together than we will on our own. And I believe with all of my heart that the best days of this church and the life of this church are ahead of us, not behind us. But what I do know is what has gotten us here doesn't mean it's what will get us there. They say that 20% of people in the church do 80% of the work, right? They say that 20% of the people in church give 80% of the money. And that won't work if we're going to get to our tomorrow. We've gotten where we are with some of you. Some of you have invested in many, many ways. And to that, I thank you with all of my heart. But we've gotten where we are without many of you. And we can't go any further without you. So over these next 3 weeks, I'm going to do my best to share with you more of the ins and outs of what it actually looks like and what it's going to take to get us there. But at the end of the day, we won't get there without you. Because do you know that you are unique, that you are special, that there is no one else on this planet that is exactly the same as you? And we're not what we need to be without you and your investment. Not just your money, not just your resources, not just your time, but you, your gifts, and your passions. We want you to ride with us and carpool towards tomorrow with us. And I'm going to do my best over these next 3 weeks to tell you more about what that looks like. And I hope that by the time we get into February, that our car is jam-packed full of people excited about our tomorrow.